Good morning in America and good afternoon in Germany. Ladies and gentlemen and friends of the Atlantik-Brücke and the American Council on Germany, I would like to welcome you very warmly to a very special event, the digital warm-up to our German-American Conference 2021. And we hope that the conference will take place as a physical event in the fall. And it's our great pleasure and honor to introduce our guest and speaker today, Victoria Nuland, Undersecretary for Political Affairs at the US Department of State. I would say one of our best friends in the Transatlantic Alliance, well known in Germany and in the Atlantik-Brücke, and whenever she could be helpful, she was, not only talking, but by doing. So it's a great pleasure to have you here, Victoria. The conversation will be moderated by our good friend John Emerson, former ambassador in Germany, who will also introduce our guests in more detail in just a moment. John, let me take this opportunity to thank you for your commitment to our shared mission. We both had, I would say, not the easiest time through the last 4 years. Because of your help and your support, we went through, and the trusted partnership and cooperation of our institutions, I would say, is strengthened during our cooperation. Formats like the American-German Conference, which we have seen co-hosting since the 1950s, are more important than ever in these challenging times. I think I speak for both organizations when I say that we really must seize the opportunity to reshape transatlantic relations now. And it's the best time because we all saw the interesting visit of Joe Biden here in Europe. It was, I would say, a great success. For some of the Europeans, it was also a great surprise that the American presidents could be friendly to us. We thought, or we always had in mind how it was during the last 4 years. So waiting is not an option. The major challenges of the future can only be overcome if the Western value partners stand shoulder to shoulder. The less we stand together, the more authoritarian and anti-democratic forces will benefit. The transatlantic partners will not always agree on all political areas in the future. And this is not such a huge problem as long as we do not lose sight of our major common goals. We must concentrate our strength and work together on the climate agenda, on human rights, on establishing clear rules for a fair global trade, on promoting innovation, on creating common standards in digital tech, and in containing anti-democratic forces. This means that we should not be too much bound with other partners. I think we should do whatever we can do to get more resilient, and therefore the US, European, and German cooperation is key. The fact that this message also emanated from the various summits of recent weeks can and should encourage us. So thank you very much. John, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Sigmar. And it's just been a joy working with you over the last couple of years. We always get together when I come to Berlin and Germany, and we've hosted you in Los Angeles. And I love the iconic bridge you have behind you in your picture there. It's just very symbolic of the strong and abiding relationship that we have. And it is a huge honor and pleasure for me to be able to welcome and thank and introduce to all of you my former boss, Victoria Nuland, who just a couple of months ago was sworn in as the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. This is a big, big job, and nobody better to handle it than Victoria. As many of you know, she was Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and Eurasia during the second Obama term. She has been the ambassador to the United States, ambassador to NATO. She was Vice President Cheney's Deputy National Security Advisor. She was the spokesperson for Hillary Clinton when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. And this is a woman who's worked under Presidents Bush, Clinton, Obama, Biden. Everybody knows that she's one of the absolute best, and we're really fortunate as members of the transatlantic relationship and just members of the global community that Toria has decided to come back into government and play this role. So thank you very, very much. What I'm going to do is throw the ball to Secretary Nuland, and she'll give us a little bit of a summary of sort of the trip that was just completed. She was an important part of a number of the meetings on that trip, and then we'll get into the Q&A and ultimately get to some of your questions. So Ambassador Nuland, I don't know what to call you, Secretary, Ambassador, whatever, but anyway, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Sigmar. Thanks so much to my dear friend, Emmo, one of Germany's greatest friends in the United States, and a dear colleague who we had a lot of fun the last time around. I am delighted to be with you all, the American Council and Atlantik-Brücke, and by coincidence for us at the State Department, as you know, this is Germany Week. Secretary Blinken has just completed a great visit to Berlin. He saw the Chancellor. He spent a lot of quality time with Minister Maas. He attended the German-hosted conference on Libya, which was a big success from our point of view. But perhaps most importantly, he and Minister Maas sat together in a beer garden with young people to talk about how they see the transatlantic relationship and what they want out of our future together, because that's what this really needs to be about, the next generation of the transatlantic relationship. And that takes me, as Emma said, to the adventures we had 2 weeks ago, as our president made his first overseas trip, first to Cornwall for the G7, then on to NATO for a summit, and then US-EU summit, and culminating in Geneva with a bilateral meeting with President Putin. I just want to give a quick sense of how that felt and what President Biden was about during that week, and the extreme intentionality, if you will, of both the choreography and the things that we did together. And just to say, Germany is one of the few countries that was central to all three of the first democratic stops, G7, NATO, and the EU. And our president's intention in choreographing it that way was that the most important democratic countries should stand together, not simply in unity to protect and defend our democracies, but also to advance a next generation agenda for them, and to demonstrate that democracy can and is and will deliver for its own people, but also for people around the world. And this is particularly important now in the context of a really serious challenge to the way we live and the way the global system is organized by autocracies, sometimes working together, China and Russia. So when I say that we didn't just meet and hug and demonstrate our unity, but we actually created the architecture of the future, I like to call it a 1949 moment, if you will. I want to just run through some of the things that were accomplished, because it might have been easy to miss with all of the pageantry. So first and foremost, as G7 nations, with Germany very much at the core of this, a pledge that we will donate 1 billion vaccines around the world to countries that need it. And as you know, the United States is putting forward 500 million of those. We're starting to deliver them already. And this comes with no political strings attached as compared to the way some of the autocracies are behaving. You know, we just had Ukraine be a victim of China when it didn't support, when it voted in the Human Rights Council for a resolution against slave labor in Xinjiang, and then had a delivery of 500,000 vaccines from China canceled on the spot. So that's using vaccine as a weapon, and we want, as the democracies, to do the opposite of that. Second, the Build Back Better World initiative that was launched at the G7. Big name, doesn't even fit on a t-shirt, but what it's really about is taking our ability to draw credit from the IMF, which we don't need as much as poorer countries need it, and donating it back to medium and lower income countries in an infrastructure fund to help offer them clean, democratic, transparent financing for infrastructure projects and other things that they need. So they have an alternative, which is Blue Dot Network compliant, to the financing, the more malign and aggressive financing that China and others are offering. So that was a G7 outcome as well. Corporate minimum tax, 15%. So we have fairness. And this also deals with some of the tensions we've had across the transatlantic space in terms of our tech companies, et cetera, and how they ought to be treated in Europe. So again, setting the global standard and doing it as the democracies, and then building out ideally to the rest of the world, hoping that the G20 will adopt this. And the last is on climate, where we've made a pledge, all of us, to transition from coal. And this comes out of the G7. And then at NATO, reaffirming Article 5, obviously, but that wasn't enough. Setting forward a 2030 agenda to make NATO stronger, more resilient, have it work on some of these issues like supply chain dependence, make sure that we can together be resilient from coercion, a tighter focus on China, and a tighter focus on cybersecurity. And then at the EU, the launching of the US-EU Trade and Technology Council. And the idea here is to have an umbrella organization with subgroups that allows us as the great transatlantic democracies to be addressing challenges like technology and keeping the internet open and free and not a tool of authoritarian governments, and setting the rules of the road that favor freedom in the tech economy and in next generation, and looking at it also as a security issue. Two, also protecting the free and open trade space, dealing with our own issues. And you saw that the Airbus-Boeing, hooray, long-standing disagreement got settled at the US-EU summit, but now moving on to other issues, but also agreeing that when we go to China to deal with their manipulation of the trade space, their manipulation of WTO rules, we will be together as a transatlantic community. So that was very important. And all of that gave great wind at President Biden's back when he went into his meeting in Geneva. And, he showed up having done real things to strengthen our democracies and to set a course for the future and to make the investments we need in our own people, in our own system, to see President Putin, who flew with just a little small team from Moscow or Sochi or whatever to sit. And what you saw in the press conference was what we actually did and what the president actually did in the room. He believes that it's most important to look leaders in the eye and be absolutely straight with them, both about the opportunities to have a better relationship, but about also our firm commitment to defend ourselves and our friends and our allies against malign Russian behavior. And that's what happened, as well as very straight talk about our concerns about human rights and all of the things that we've worked together with Germany, response to the Navalny poisoning, attacks on our democratic election systems, manipulation of disinformation into our political space, the threats to Ukraine, Belarus, all of these issues. So I was privileged to be in the room for those conversations. The good news is that it was very productive. It was very workmanlike. There was not a lot of histrionics or any of that stuff. We will see now. We've given the Russians a number of areas where we can cooperate, including in strategic stability, including in ransomware and getting a handle on these criminals who are ransoming our pipelines, et cetera, including in Syria, where we need to get more humanitarian access. And, as the president said, the proof of the pudding with Putin, the Putin pudding, if you will be in the eating. So we'll see how we do over the next 6 months. Thanks, guys.
Well, that sounds like a tremendous amount of work accomplished in a couple of weeks. Obviously, there was a lot of work that went into the lead up to that, but thank you very much. And I think you're right. I think in the the press headlines, and of course, the focus on, who sat next to who and who hugged who, and was Boris Johnson's suit rumply, people sort of miss some of the details of what really did come out of this. And I think that the press focus was much more on the optics and much less on this. And so thank you very much for sharing that. I think that's hugely important. I want to come back to China, but let's stick on Russia for a minute. Toria, you were literally running point for the administration in responding to the Russian incursion in Ukraine and the Donbass, the illegal annexation of Crimea, to the point that some of us joke that you were also the Assistant Secretary for the Ukraine. And at that time, nobody was more deeply involved in those issues than you. We just had a pretty concerning situation about a month ago with the Russian troops on the border, and then they were pulled down. Can you give us a couple of minutes on where you think we are vis-a-vis Ukraine, vis-a-vis getting Russia to stand back and making progress in that area?
Thanks, Emma. Well, the issues with Ukraine are not any different than the last time when we were in government together, which is first and foremost protecting her sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence, supporting Ukraine's right to self-defense, and the challenge of making the other 93% of Ukraine that has not been subject to Russian aggression as strong and clean and democratic a country as possible, as it seeks to align more closely with Europe and with us. So, that's the frame. The Russian incursion was, the Russian buildup was, without any provocation. I think Moscow did not expect the very swift and strong transatlantic response, led, I would say, by the US and Germany together, to the incursion in terms of sanctions and speaking out and diplomacy and support for Ukraine and increased security attention there. It did cause Russia to back down somewhat, but we need to be vigilant because a lot of the hardware got left outside of Donbass, and there was a significant buildup in Crimea, which allows the Russians to block aspects of the Black Sea. And we saw them try to assert sovereignty yesterday when the UK naval vessel went through and what should be international waters, and the Russians tried to claim it. So we have to remain vigilant. We have to continue to send messages that any efforts to further inflame the security situation or intimidate Ukraine will be responded to swiftly by all of us. I think, my president certainly made that clear to Putin. But at the same time, Ukraine's equally important challenge is continuing on the reform path. And we've gotten back, Secretary Blinken and I were there, as you know, in early May, and we expect to see President Zelensky in Washington. And we're very much back in the business of tracking their reform efforts and trying to work with them to keep them on track with the things that need to be done, including corporate governance that is clean and transparent as they privatize more state-owned enterprises, but for things like Naftogaz, ensuring that the judiciary is independent and can actually get bad guys into jail, which they haven't done too much of. So I think we as allies, and particularly US, Germany, France, UK, G7, US, EU, need to get back into the habit of having a common message to Ukraine on reform as well, of the kinds of things that we are hoping to see to support the aspirations of the Ukrainian people.
Well, I don't think we can talk about Ukraine without commenting on or just getting your sense of where we are and what one of the geopolitical concerns about Nord Stream 2, which of course is, would that give Russia a opportunity to put a stranglehold on, of course, gas going through Ukraine, if almost analogous to what you were saying the Chinese did, and they didn't like what they did, so they canceled the 500,000 vaccines. Could you see something comparable happening if we had Nord Stream 2 with Ukraine, with Russia in effect punishing Ukraine by stopping the gas flowing there. Was this a topic that, obviously to the extent you can talk about it, that came up in the meeting with Vladimir Putin, and where are we on Nord Stream 2? This is obviously a largely German audience, and there might be some interest in that as well.
I mean, with regard to Nord Stream 2, the reason that we have opposed it since the Obama administration, and we worked a lot on it, as you remember, Emma, in 2014, 15, and 16 as well, and began asking intensive questions, which are now even stronger questions, is that we think, as my president has said, that this is an extremely bad deal for Europe and for Germany. And as you said, it threatens potentially not only the energy security, but the security of countries like Ukraine that we've worked so hard to support. So, you know, from our perspective, we frankly don't understand why this investment was made. It deepens Germany and Europe's dependence not only on hydrocarbons, but on Russian hydrocarbons and the ability of Moscow to cut off Europe if it wants, but also, as you said, to cut off Ukraine. And when there is more oil and gas flowing through Nord Stream 2, then the Ukrainian transit pipeline becomes less important, and that will not only cost Ukraine quite a bit of economic support, but also energy of its own, and it can allow Moscow to again use energy as a weapon, both on Europe and on Ukraine. So look, we were making some progress, we felt, on this in the Obama administration. Frankly, when construction started again in 2018 in earnest, not clear to me what was done during those years. But by the time President Biden came into office, the actual construction piece was 90% complete. That's a different matter than certification and testing and actually using the pipeline. So the conversation that we're in now, intensively with Germany, and this did come up in all of Secretary Blinken's meetings yesterday, including with the Chancellor, was how do we protect against Nord Stream 2 being a weapon of coercion, either against Europe or against Ukraine? How do we build in the resiliency? How do we strengthen the energy security situation of Ukraine and other Eastern European countries? And how do we make it clear to Russia that if they use this as a weapon of coercion, the reaction will be swift and strong? So that's the conversation that we're having now. As you know, this is a matter of bipartisan concern in the US Congress. It is particularly up close and personal for the State Department because we have members of the Senate who are refusing to confirm State Department nominees unless and until we get a handle on this issue with Germany. So we're working on it intensively. We're working with Ukraine. We're working with other countries.
I think the difference between the way we're approaching it and the way we approached it in the Obama years and the way the previous administration approached it is we approach it as an issue we need to discuss within the context of a larger, deeper, more robust relationship. Whereas I think during the previous 4 years, it felt like this was the only thing. This and NATO funding were the only thing that mattered in the transatlantic relationship. So that's my commentary, not yours, but it's certainly, I think it has a different feel to it. Not that we're not, pushing as hard as we can to get to the right place. Let's pivot back to the topic you mentioned earlier, and Sigmar, did you want to jump in here for a sec?
But not for Nord Stream. We have slightly different opinions. Maybe we can discuss it.
But Sigmar, let me just also add, I think what Emma just said is absolutely right. What we're trying to do is nest this intense issue and problem within the larger improved relationship where we are together trying to rebuild and strengthen democratic structures. So go ahead, Sigmar.
I would like to, I hope we will discuss it when next time in Washington. I don't want to bother you here during this session, but I have a question to Putin and Russia. I mean, Biden said he wanted to have a predictable and reliable kind of relationship, not partnership, but relationship to Putin. But Putin showed us during the last years that he always wants to do the opposite. He was a kind of spoiler, and whenever he was unreliable, unpredictable, then of course for him it looked like a victory. So the question is, where do you see the interest of Putin in having a better relationship to the US? I mean, what's his where we can get him? What could be the reason why he should interested in a better cooperation? Because whenever he's a spoiler, everybody wants to meet him, and so his strategy is the opposite, to be unpredictable and unreliable. What's your feeling? Why the Russians are maybe interested in having a better relationship to the US? I mean, it's true, he always wants to see himself on the same level like the US president. That's for him something very important, but that can't be the only issue why we will get Putin or Russia to a more predictable, I would say, not partner, but neighbor.
Well, thanks, Sigmar. Listen, I'm always shy about questions where you're essentially asking me to get inside the brain of Vladimir Putin. That's not a place that I particularly want to be.
And that's impossible.
Yeah. But I will simply give you some American ideas on this and where my president is coming from, if that makes sense. Look, when you set out at the beginning of the term that your goal is predictable and stable, and that's what we're prepared to work for, then you're really putting the ball back in Putin's court. If he is unpredictable and unstable, it's not that we haven't given him the chance. It's not that we haven't stated our own strategic preference and intention. And the last piece of this is the president was equally clear with Putin that if he chooses not to go in that direction, we will defend and protect not only ourselves, but our friends and allies. And as I said about the wind at the president's back, it was clear that we have them and we can work with them in that context. So again, you're putting the choice to Putin in a very clear way. I will say that on a number of things that we're talking about, you know, if you want to put yourself inside the Kremlin, there are issues for them. For example, you know, in the same way that we have concerns about some of the new weapons that Putin is building that are destabilizing and outside of arms control agreements, and nobody quite knows whether they work or how they might be used. They've got concerns about some of our weapon systems and some of our defenses, et cetera. So you could argue that if we can get into strategic stability talks, there may be some trade-offs there that ensure that we can make it more safe for our people, that there'll be no accidents here, that there'll be no miscommunication here, and perhaps even put some constraints on some of these systems to our mutual benefit, as we have in the past, as even in the worst times we were able to do that. So that's a test there. Afghanistan, Putin was very clear, even, you know, that for Russia, when the US and our NATO allies in Germany leave Afghanistan, if it potentially, you know, as it becomes more unstable, as the Taliban, if they don't choose peace and instead choose violence, then that is, you know, causes challenges and threats for Russia as well. And the, you know, ungoverned spaces for terrorism, et cetera, that we were primarily taking care of. So, you know, one of the issues was that the US is going to need over the horizon capability to support Afghan security forces. So whether that's supporting the Air Force, whether that's helping with counterterrorism missions as required. So we're talking, you know, to some of the Central Asian countries about that. Putin, you know, on the map doesn't love it, but having that conversation about if we don't do that, all of these, you know, bad actors and destabilization is going to be right on your border, you know, that might be an interest. And then the last piece is just China. As you know, Russian dependence on China has grown exponentially, particularly since 2014, when we did sectoral sanctions in response to Ukraine. And Putin knows it and feels it. And it was very clear he'd like more, European and US investment. There's a price to pay for that. You've got to be a predictable, stable actor. You've got to not be threatening. You've got to be a better place to do business. You've got to not lock up business people as they've done with ours. And so, you can have frank talk about the options there, and we'll see what choices he makes.
Thanks.
Thanks. That's a great question and a really informative answer. Appreciate that. So let's go to China. I have to tell you, Tori, in all my travels, a lot of them in Europe, and particularly in Germany, I get this question more than anything else: is that what's the U.S. policy on China? We don't like the idea of decoupling. We don't want to have to. We're concerned about China, but we also want to do business with them. There's almost this schizophrenic sense, I think, here in Germany, in particular, coming from. Largely from the business community. And I was struck by Tony Blinken's first speech as secretary, where he, in talking about China, he said, well, you will compete with them where, we'll cooperate with them and coordinate with them where we can, we'll compete with them where we should, and we'll be adversarial with them where we must. And one thing I love about this 1 billion, vaccinations in the developing world is it's a way to compete with what China's doing in One Belt, One Road. I mean, we've basically been, at least over the last 4 years, just sort of vacated that playing field, and they've got free running room there, which isn't necessarily good. But the question that comes up often here in Germany is, well, how can we continue to be tough on China as it relates to trade, as it relates to human rights violations and all that, and at the same time work with them on the issues that maybe the previous administration didn't care so much about, like climate change and nuclear nonproliferation, but how can we do both simultaneously? Can you shed some light on that?
This is called diplomacy. This is called walking and chewing gum. This is what strong nations have done historically. This is what we had to do vis-a-vis the Soviet Union and what we have to do now with Russia. As we talked about before, we had arms control because it was in our shared interest throughout the worst times in US-Soviet history. So look, it's in China's interest, and I think Xi Jinping has even acknowledged this, to get a hold of its emissions and to have a greener, cleaner China. So if we can do that together, that would be great. We have other issues, like they're working well with us in the JCPOA negotiations on Iran, because they don't want a nuclear Iran. Things like that where our interests align. And we're not, more broadly, I think it's a very important message for Germans, for Europeans. The United States is not asking or suggesting that you choose between the US and China. The structure and fundamentals of the relationship are completely different. We too have a massive trade relationship with China. What we're trying to do, and we want to do it together with you, is make it fairer and more transparent, because our companies are being ripped off as they invest in China. They're having to give over their IP. They're being pitted against Chinese state-owned enterprises that are massively subsidized by the state. How can you compete against that? The Chinese don't play by the rules. So we are delighted to keep trading and have Europe keep trading, but we don't want you to be ripped off, and we don't want to be ripped off either. And we are stronger as an economy of 750 million people, US and Europe, than we are each doing this separately, as the Trump administration wanted. And maybe our combined force will compel the Chinese to take notice. But at least when we have to take punitive measures, we ideally will do it together. WTO. We all thought if we let the Chinese into the World Trade Organization, it would be civilizing on the way they do international business. And what happened was they started manipulating the rules of this great free trade institution. So now we need to align to strengthen that. And then there's all the predatory investing. And this is where, we're really quite worried for Europe. And, the Huawei focus of the previous administration was good. It would have been better if we came and said, don't buy Huawei, buy something else. We're now in a better place in terms of alternatives. But, when we look at how much of Europe China has been trying to buy up, and particularly strategic assets, they're pretty active all along the littoral, anywhere where there's a seaport, from Puerto Paredes onward. And now they're looking at electricity and companies and telecoms and everything else, particularly in Central Europe. We say, let's combine efforts on tougher investment screening regimes so that we know who's buying our stuff, and we keep state-owned actors, malign actors, potentially coercive actors from owning too much and being able to use it as a weapon in the future. So those are the kinds of things we need to do. We're also looking, in the United States, we've just done a complete review of where we are vulnerable because China is overly dominant in particular sectors. And so we come up with rare earth metals and electric batteries and pharma, and I'm forgetting the last one. But anyway, we come up with 4 key areas, and we say we're going to work on building resilience and redundancy in the United States supply chain, so it's not just China, and we want to do it together with friends and allies. So when the South Korean president comes, he opens an electric battery factory in the American South. We want to do this together with Europe so that we don't turn around 10 years from now and only China has these things. So this is about hardening and defending even as we try to trade, and it's also about enforcing the rules. And it's about standing with people all over the world, but particularly in Chinese-speaking space that are being threatened and abused by Beijing, whether it's the million Uyghurs who are enslaved now in one way or another, whether it's the breaking of the deal that was made on Hong Kong, or any of the rest of it. And we can do that together. And if China wants to benefit from the system that we built, it needs to obey the rules. And we can compel that if we're stronger together.
Well, that's a great and comprehensive answer, and just really important for people to understand on the areas where we're cooperating with China. We're not asking them to do us a favor. It's in their interest to cooperate, so it's not at all inconsistent. We are not telling Germany or Europe, don't do any business with China. We're saying be smart about it. And by the way, working with us to make sure they're playing by the rules, you're going to have a lot more clout than if you just go and try to do it on your own, and learn from the lessons that we've learned, that we've seen. And the third point about foreign direct investment, you'll remember that literally it was about our last week in office in 2017, and Sigmar, you'll remember this as well. We had deep concern through our CFIUS process about the Chinese acquisition of a company that would have had major, just one little piece of that company would have had major national security implications. And you and several others came into the embassy. We declassified information, and this thing was about to go down, and you stopped it. You stopped that acquisition. And one of the things I was saying was, you guys have got to have a CFIUS process. You got to do it. And my understanding is that Germany is right on the verge of, or maybe has even just recently adopted a process like that with limits of what foreign entities can own. And that, I think, is very, very smart as well. So it feels like we're moving towards the right place. And I think we probably have some public diplomacy work to do in terms of getting, Germans to understand this isn't about, you can't do business there. It's about being smart about how we do it and protecting our own resources and making the investments, as you suggested, Toria. I'm wondering if solar on the might have been the fourth thing on the supply chain issue, maybe not. But anyway, making investments in technology so we can, once again, get out in front of all that. But that's just a great answer. And then I probably should go to some of the questions that we're getting from viewers. But one little not little, but one topic that you mentioned that where China's being helpful is in the JCPOA, trying to, in effect, get us back into the Iran nuclear deal and ultimately, I suppose, renegotiate that or move to the next negotiations. Your predecessor in the Obama era was in the middle of those negotiations. She's now, Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman. Is this a portfolio that you'll be picking up as well? And where do we stand on that? There's I see different things in the press about we're making progress, but now of course you have the election of a hardliner in Iran, and there's concern about him coming in, whether we have a 6-week window before he comes in to get this done. Can you shed some light, obviously, to the extent you're able, without violating anything, shed some light on that for us?
Great. Just to say, I have my act together here. The 4 areas where we're seeking U.S. resiliency and suggesting that Europe and other allies have the same vis-a-vis supply chains: rare earth metals, batteries, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals. So those are the 4.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Encouraging, yeah. With regard to the Iran talks,
sorry, Victoria, did the Europeans understand that's about resilience and technology leadership? Because sometimes here in the press you can find it as a kind of ideological debate about Cold War 2.0, or how you want to call it, and not about resilience and independence, sovereignty that would be necessary. Is your feeling that they understand that's about sovereignty, and that getting European sovereignty in this case, it's only possible by joining hands with the Americans, because we are not able, unfortunately, to be a player in this game. So we need the Transatlantic Alliance to be more resilient and not to come to the end of the value chain. So I don't know if this was the feeling that the Europeans understood. It's not an ideological driven competition, but it's on substance about more resilience and sovereignty against other authoritarian competitors.
Sigmar, I think that we are getting there in terms of the intellectual and government to government understanding that all of us are vulnerable if the vast majority of this stuff is only made in China. What's important in the next stage is to make it clear that as the US seeks to diversify supply, we are open for business in this regard with our allies and partners. This is not a US industrial policy to block out everybody. And therefore we're welcoming co-production of these things with allies. As you say, Europe won't be able to do all of this on its own, but Europeans are very strong in pharma. You're increasingly strong in electric batteries. So I think there are places where pooling our effort will give both sides of the Atlantic more options. And it's also not about going to zero in terms of what we import from China if we need to, and certainly in the interim period. It's about being sure that we don't wake up one day and Beijing has said no rare earth metals for any of you because of Xinjiang, or something like that. So it's about that. But I think we're getting there. What we need now is for all of our allies and partners to also audit their own vulnerabilities, and for us to find these good innovators inside our economies and scale them up together. So that's an important piece of this work. And ideally, the US-EU Trade and Investment, Trade and Technology Council will be part of stimulating that.
So JCPOA.
JCPOA. So look, I think we've done a lot of good work here to set the terms of coming back into the deal and understanding that it will be followed by a longer, stronger deal. But the Iranians have to make a choice. And as you know, as has always been the case, this will be a choice that the supreme leader makes. You know, we I think collectively can see the shape of the deal now, but those fundamental political decisions have to be made. You make a good point that this period before Raisi sits might be a period for their own political reasons that is more convenient than it's the previous guy's deal. But you know, we're not there yet. We could turn around and this has happened very quickly, or it could not happen. We just don't know. So we need to be cautious. But what's most important is that we are all working on it together. We all have the same goal, not just to get back into the JCPOA, but to go on to a longer, stronger deal that addresses some of the things that were not included in the first deal.
Absolutely. So Toria, we got a couple of questions that have come in, and so let me kind of synthesize those. So one is kind of interesting, makes the point that the transatlantic relationship is not just about government to government, it's business to business, it's people to people. And the sooner we can all travel across the Atlantic, particularly those of us who are vaccinated, the more robust that relationship can resume, or robustly, I suppose, the relationship can resume. So any sense on where we are? I was kind of hoping as a transatlanticist that there'd be some announcement coming out of the meeting in the EU that we're all lifting bans for at least vaccinated people. Any sense of timing on that, or is it just a moving target because of these variants?
So the secretary spoke to this in Berlin yesterday, I guess, at the press conference, also got a question. You know, it's very painful for all of us who want to see everybody on planes, not just business people, but our students and folks who, you know, get such benefit out of spending their summers on one side or the other of the pond. But we got to be smart, and we particularly have to be smart as these new dangerous variants are surging in other parts of the world. You know, the US is a gateway for the rest of the world. Europe is a gateway for the rest of the world. So what we've done, as you know, is set up a US-EU commission, a US-UK commission, a US-Canada commission to look at the science, look at the numbers, and track over a period of time so that when we make this decision, we are confident that it'll take our countries, societies forward and not take us backward, because we've all worked so hard to get where we are right now. So I can't put a timeline on it. I wish I could, but we're working hard at it with a lot of folks.
Yeah, well, that sounds good. Another question from someone asked about the president's commitment to develop a foreign policy that works for the middle class, and the question is that more of a political slogan, or how do you do that in reality? I mean, my guess is trade would have something to do with that in terms of how we negotiate trade in a way that helps in fact enhance our manufacturing base and what have you. But what are your thoughts on that, and perhaps the role that could play in the transatlantic relationship?
Well, this is something that has undergirded what we've just done in the G7 and what we hope to do in the US-EU relationship. And we were pleased to see the G7 adopt President Biden's Build Back Better slogan. So we all need in the free world to be spurring the creation of next generation jobs, not old, hard, dirty jobs, but green jobs, high-tech jobs, et cetera. So we need the work that we do together and the money that we put into international vehicles to be stimulating those kinds of jobs, both in our economies and in the economies of the middle and lower income countries. So that's why this investment vehicle that we created at the G7, Build Back Better World, which is based on using IMF drawing rights to create an infrastructure fund, is around jobs for lower and middle income countries that pull our medium and small businesses in as well, to investing in those countries, not as China does with dirty predatory lending and all the jobs are held by Chinese workers, but they're held by our workers according to transparent standards with high labor and environmental bars on them, to do that at home in Germany and in the US and in the way we export development finance around the world. That's one piece. And then to ensure that as we work on trade issues, whether it's getting rid of steel and aluminum tariffs, which I hope we'll be able to do, or how we deal with China, that we are insisting on the standards where we are competitive, right? If we don't tackle the dominance of state-owned enterprises coming from China, then we don't have a level playing field, and our small and medium and larger companies can't compete on a global scale. So we want those jobs to be, in Germany and in the United States, because we're the best and because we're able to be competitive, not to be in China because they are pouring money into it in a way that we can't and shouldn't and isn't fair. So that's the fundamental thinking behind a foreign policy for the middle class. But the proof, as President Biden said, will be in the eating of the pudding.
Well, it also, I mean, what's important about it is to get, sort of everyday Americans, everyday Germans, understanding the importance of foreign policy to their daily lives, as opposed to just something that's out there that the elites deal with. So I think there's an important political imperative for that, for that to be successful as well. A couple of questions on Belarus. Where are we on that? I guess the EU just launched some sanctions. What's your take on that situation?
Belarus is very tough. I mean, Lukashenko has proven that he's not only willing to be a complete thug vis-a-vis his own people, he's willing to be an international thug, hijacking aircraft, etc. I think we were extremely gratified to see how quickly the EU acted, and all the states of the EU in grounding the Belarusian aircraft and not flying over their airspace. Those were tools that you had that we didn't have. They don't fly to the US. But then working together on a very large list of named sanctions that came out on Monday that we did on both sides of the Atlantic. When we do it together, as you know, it has far more impact. But now the EU has actually gone one step further than the US by putting in sectoral sanctions, particularly against things like potash, which is a fertilizer that the Belarusian economy and some of the hoods around Lukashenko are very dependent on. We're going to try to match that in the US now. But the issue here is to try to stand with the Belarusian people, who've been very clear that all they're asking of Lukashenko is to hold a free and fair election. He can run, let him run, but he doesn't have the courage to do that. And our friends in Moscow are increasingly hemorrhaging money supporting those guys, whether it's on the security side or increasingly on the economic side. So we have been in intense consultation as well with those in Belarus who want to live better, including Mrs. Tikhanovskaya, and Europe has been very supportive of her. So we will see. But this latest round of pressure, we think, will be quite impactful.
Well, that's good. The the whole question of bringing pressure against this authoritarian regime in question brings to mind the president's comments about authoritarianism, democracy. You mentioned that as well. One of our questioners or participants has asked whether we're also thinking of or including, Japan, South Korea, other democracies around the world, not just this just isn't a US European thing.
Absolutely, and very, very good and important point. You'll recall, maybe you won't recall, but our president's first foreign engagement was with what we call the Asian Quad, so Japan, yes, Australia, India, to work on strengthening the democratic space and security and free economic activity in Asia. And we are also talking intensively with those countries and you know, Japan is a member of the G7. They were in Cornwall. They supported all of these things. So the idea here is that all the things I talked about in the transatlantic area, you know, investment screening and development finance, that is a good alternative to China, and looking at where we're vulnerable in our supply chains, and of course, strengthening freedom of navigation, standing up for human rights. We are also pursuing with the ROK, with Japan, with Australia, with the ASEANs, with New Zealand, with India now, and hoping that European links with those democracies, big democracies in Asia, will also strengthen. And then, you know, we have to do the same with the democracies of Latin America and Asia and Africa as well.
Well, we're almost at our time. I know you've got many other things to attend to, and this was so wide-ranging, and as always, Toria, thoughtful, to the point, and giving us a lot to chew on. And deeply appreciate your joining with us. This is sort of the kickoff to our transatlantic, would be normally our transatlantic conference. Was going to be taking place in, I think, various steps. David Deissner of Atlantik-Brücke, Steve Sokol of American Council on Germany. Thank you guys. Sigmar, Gabriel, always many, many thanks. And Sigmar and I are going to see each other in Berlin tomorrow night, Toria. So we continue. But thank you so much. I just can't tell you how glad people are as I make my rounds that you're back. The team is back together. Obviously looking forward to Karen Donfried's confirmation as well. And but thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. You have global responsibilities, but you're here today, and that's noted and deeply appreciated.
Well, thanks to both of you and to both institutions for all you do to keep the transatlantic relationship strong. And we've got a lot of building to do, right? To protect and defend all we grew up with. So thanks, everybody. It's been great.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.